All right, everybody, please take your seats and we will get our program started right now. Welcome, everyone. I'm John Hinderocker, President of Center of the American Experiment. Before we begin, I'd like to just ask one quick question. For a show of hands, please raise your hand if this is your first American Experiment event ever. Wow, okay. Well, I think that is a testament to how many people are anxious to see our featured speaker today, Riley Gaines. Riley was a swimmer at the University of Kentucky. She is a 12-time All-American. She twice was an Olympic trial qualifier. She was an SEC Student Athlete of the Year, and an excellent student, by the way. It was her plan to begin dental school in the next month or so, but that plan got sidelined because her life took a turn when she competed in the 2022 NCAA Swimming Championships, and she'll probably talk about that today. So now, Riley Gaines is the #1 advocate for women in women's sports, and she also has become a star congressional witness. So please welcome Riley Gaines.
Well, can I just tell you guys what a blessing it is to be applauded? because I have been in crowds where it is very much not that warm welcoming. Seriously though, I just recently went to San Francisco State University. I know, my first mistake was going to San Francisco. But I went there with an open mind. You know, I was excited. I knew this environment would be different than what I'm used to. I'm from Tennessee, where, you know, we don't put up with this stuff. And so I knew the environment would be different, but I was naive to think that these people would come with open minds. They did not. After delivering my speech, a speech very similar to what I'll be talking to you guys about, I was met with ambush. I was physically assaulted by a man who was claiming the identity of a woman, and then held for hostage, for ransom, really, for 3.5 hours. I was barricaded in a room where hundreds of protesters held me, and they demanded that I had to pay them money if I wanted to make it home to see my family safely again. To which the police who were there did nothing. The school, the university which this was held at, did nothing. There have been no expulsions, no arrests, none of that, of course not. Actually, the university doubled down on their stance, with their vice president of student affairs the next day sending out an email to their student body. We applaud the behavior of our students, our brave students, for handling Riley Gaines in the manner that they did. So I don't take it lightly when I'm applauded anywhere. This is great. But seriously, this is a huge crowd, and I could not be more grateful that you guys are here to just listen. This past year, as John mentioned, my life has changed drastically from what I thought I was going to be doing. I realized really the quickest way to make God laugh in your face is to make plans and a future for yourself. I graduated from the University of Kentucky last year with my degree in human health sciences and health law, and I did have every intent on going to dental school. But ultimately, I've kind of realized dental school will always be there. But the importance and the relevance behind the issue that I'm fighting for won't always be there, and I saw what's at stake if someone didn't fight for it. I saw what a disservice it would be, not of course to myself because I'm done competing, but for those past female athletes who came before me, who fought relentlessly for Title IX. I'm sure there are even several of you in this room who saw the benefits of Title IX when it was implemented in 1972, not to age you guys, sorry. But also what a disservice it would be to the present female athletes who were in my exact same position and were effectively silenced. And of course, the next generation of female athletes who don't yet understand the implications of what this means for them. And of course, they don't yet have a voice. So that's why I'm doing this. But a little bit about me, like I said, I'm from Tennessee. I grew up swimming. I started swimming when I was 4 years old. I graduated college when I was 22, so I dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport. By the time I was 8 years old, that's when I started swimming year-round. So this means in second grade, you're swimming 2 hours every single day, and it really only gets worse from there. I guess I should say harder. It only gets harder from there, because then you're practicing middle school, high school, you're practicing before school, you go to school, you come back from school, you go straight back to practice where you swim for another 2 hours. After practice, you go home, you eat your dinner, you do your homework, you ice your shoulder, you go to bed, you wake up, you do it all again the next day. And so I'm biased. I'm sorry, I think the SEC is the best conference. I think the SEC is the best conference. My dad, he was an SEC football player. My mom, she played softball. All my family really was SEC athletes. And so I knew I wanted to stay in the SEC. And so my junior year, I was pretty heavily recruited. To be totally frank, I could have gone anywhere in the country that I wanted. And so I always thought I was going to be a Florida Gator. And I took my trip to Florida, and I didn't get that feeling of home. And so I kept taking my trips. And my boyfriend at the time, which is not the same man I'm married to now, but my boyfriend at the time, he was a big Kentucky fan. And this Kentucky coach, oh my gosh, he kept pestering me to come on a visit. And they weren't a very good swimming school. But this is when Kentucky basketball wasn't losing to the Peacocks or whoever we lost to in the NCAA championships a few years ago. So I was like, okay, it would be a cool opportunity if I got to take my boyfriend to a basketball game, which they were offering me. I'll just honestly take advantage of them. But I went to the university, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the team. The coach who was pestering me is now my best friend still to this day. We talk every single day. The athletic resources, of course, but outside of that, what they provided in your academics, your service, I loved it. And so on a whim, without even telling my parents, I committed to this school. But it was the best decision I could have made for myself. And so I get there my freshman year, and I thought I had worked hard before. This was a whole new level of working hard. We were swimming 6 hours in the water every single day, with 3 of those hours being before 8 a.m. So you practice from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., same story. You go to class, you come back from 1:30 to 4:30, you practice again, not to mention the weights sessions we had 3 times a week. We finished practice at 4:30, we would eat our dinner at old people time at 4:45. We would, again, eat your dinner, do your homework, ice your shoulder, go to bed, wake up to it all again the next day. So my freshman year, it was a lot of adjusting. I think I was sore. I never recovered the entire year. my muscles just ached. And I did some good things. I was improving, but I knew I was capable of more. And so my sophomore year, we come back. And I was really having this breakout season. This is when I finally had developed this sense of consistency. Among your diet, your sleep, there's more that goes into it than just your swimming. As I mentioned, it's the weights, it's your sleep, it's your diet, it's your physical rehabilitation, not to mention the social sacrifices that you have to make. And so I finally developed a sense of consistency. Breakout season, this was actually the first year that I had won an individual SEC title. We were geared up, ready to go for NCAAs, which is the fastest meet in the world, short course. It's the meet you train all year for. It's your national championships. And so it was in March of 2020, about 3 days before we were supposed to leave for our national championships, the world shut down. And I will never forget our coaches. They pulled us out of the water. He sat us down and he said, if you're living in the dorms, pack your stuff up. You have to go home tonight. And we never got sent home for swimming. So I was really under my breath like, oh my gosh, yes, this is so exciting. But that excitement really lasted all of 24 hours before I realized what this really meant, because there were no pools open, there were no gyms open, and I knew we would have to come back to the university and continue at some point. And this was a really stressful time, a really scary thought, because as I mentioned, swimming is not a sport you get to take time off. We didn't get to come home for Christmas. We didn't get to come home for Thanksgiving. We were there all summer. We got 1 week off in August each year. So I was stressing, what are we gonna do? God forbid we take 1 day out of the water, never mind months. And so being from Tennessee, which you guys here would have the exact same benefit, there's an abundance of lakes. And so I put on a wetsuit every single day and swam miles aimlessly in Old Hickory Lake. Had this route where I would jump in the boat dock and swim down by Johnny Cash's house and then come back. And I did it every single day. The amount of snakes that I ran into and like dead catfish, it was very unpleasant. But I knew I had to do this if I wanted to continue that breakout season I was having my sophomore year. And so this continued on until we eventually got to come back to school. But I did just that. I continued that breakout season, whereas a lot of my competitors and my teammates didn't have that same luxury. Ultimately this year, we had to deal with the mask, the pressuring to get the vaccine, to which I refrained from because I wasn't going to be bullied into anything. Now looking back, I actually think the pressure for our university and our athletic department trying to make us get the vaccine, that was my first time really learning to stand up for myself, and I think it really prepared me for this situation that I'm in. But anyways, I ultimately finished my junior year. I finished 7th in the country, which I was proud of. You know, I was top 8. I was an All-American. I had done some good things, but again, I knew I was capable of more. And it was when I finished 7th in the country that I made it my goal to win a national title my senior year, which would of course mean becoming the fastest swimmer in the country in my respective event. Senior year starts, and I was right on pace to do just that. About middle of my senior season, so November of 2021, I was ranked 3rd in the country, behind one amazing female swimmer who I knew very well, and we were separated by a few 100ths of a second. But I knew her well because, like in most sports, your top tier athletes, you know of each other regardless of where you're competing in the country because you've grown up competing against each other. And so the girl in 2nd I knew very well. But the person who was trailing the country, I had never heard of before. And so this is the first time I became aware of a swimmer named Lia Thomas. And there was a lot of red flags. Again, unbeknownst to me at the time, this was anything other than a female. One, the swimmer was from University of Pennsylvania, which is not a school that historically produces fast swimmers. 2, they were ranked in the top of the country in the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint event, and all of the freestyle events in between until the mile. And so I know a lot of you might not understand swimming, but if you think about this in terms of your Olympic runners, this is like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner. They're totally different systems. That doesn't happen. 3, this person was a senior. 4, not only were they just leading the country, they were leading the country by body length, seconds. And swimming is a sport that's measured down to the 100th of a second. So to have one person leading every female in the country by many seconds is a rarity, to say the least. And so I was talking to my coaches, my family, my teammates. We didn't know who this person was. We hadn't seen pictures of this person yet. I remember looking up there's this database called USA Swimming, which is where all time progression can be tracked. So if you were to look at my name on USA Swimming, it has me back from when I was 8 years old. And so I'm looking up the name Lia Thomas. There's no history of this person until this season. And so I thought, how weird. Never once occurred to me this was a male. Until a few days after these nation-leading times were posted, an article came out disclosing, very briefly, in a blip of a sentence, as if we were supposed to just read right over it, Lia Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch to the women's team. And my coach sent me the link, and he said, you need to see this. And I remember reading it, and reading it again, and then reading it again. And I was so shocked. Of course I was shocked. But really, I felt this sense of relief because it made everything make sense. because why I say was relieved, I was then able to look up who Will Thomas was, because I was curious. Was this a lateral movement? Was this someone who went from ranking in the top of the men's to now continuing to rank at the top among the women? Which is, of course, not what we saw. Will Thomas was a mediocre male swimmer at best, ranking 462nd in the nation in the year prior among the men. But that's why I say I was relieved, because I thought the NCAA would see it how I saw it, how my coaches saw it, how my teammates saw it, how anyone with a brain would probably comprehend this. But that is not how the NCAA saw it. They saw absolutely nothing wrong with allowing Lia Thomas to compete with the women. And let me rephrase, nothing was hateful, nothing was opinionated about our stance. It was merely the facts on the paper in front of us. This person went from ranking 462nd among the men, which is not even anywhere remotely close to even qualifying for national championships, to now trailing the women. But again, the NCAA saw no problem with that. And so about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of 2022, the NCAA announced that Lia Thomas would in fact be competing with the women, and there was nothing we could do about it. And so I got to personally witness and really feel the effect that this infringement had on myself, again, and my teammates and my competitors. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw from 9th and 17th place finishers who missed out on being named an All-American by 1 place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around, there's a 6'4", 22-year-old man fully exposed with, and I guess intact with, and exposing male genitalia while you're simultaneously undressing. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the grumbles and the whispers, because that's what they were whispers, of anger and frustration from these girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get to this meet. And so that first day of competition rolls around, and this is the 500 freestyle, which is an event that's too long for me. And so I watched, I didn't swim this event, so I watched on the side of the pool as Thomas swam in prelims. Again, for those of you who don't know how swimming works, there's prelims, you have to qualify top 16, you come back and you'll swim finals, and that's where you will achieve your overall national ranking. And so I'm watching prelims, and this girl, her name is Reka, our teams were sat next to each other. She was from Virginia Tech. She was a 5th year. Because of COVID, we got an extra year of eligibility, and why anyone would take it, I don't know, but Reka did. She's from Hungary, and I asked her, I straight up, I'm like, why did you take your 5th year? And she said, well, I wanted to become an All-American. It's been a goal of mine. And so she had swam in one of the previous heats of the 500, and so she had just finished, she was out of breath, her heart rate was high, she came out, and we're standing beside each other, and I knew her. I didn't know her very well, but I knew who she was. And we're watching this final heat, and she's kind of on the edge of her seat because she knows she's going to be right on the cusp of making top 16. And I will never forget, we watched this last heat come in where Thomas is swimming, blows everyone out of the water, of course. Reka looks up at the scoreboard and realizes she got 17th. And this is when my feelings shifted entirely, because up until this point I felt kind of confused and I felt mad and I felt, there was almost like a sense of intriguement. Of course I knew it was wrong, but I was kind of intrigued as to what this would look like. But I will never forget, Reka grabbed my hand. Again, I didn't know her that well. She grabbed my hand, tears running down her face, and she says, I just got beat by someone who didn't even have to try. And I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's when my feelings really shifted to heartbreak. And so we come back that night, and of course we watch as Lia Thomas again wins a national title, beating out Olympians, American record holders. These aren't scrubs, these are the best swimmers in the world, again by multiple seconds. And so that next day of competition is the 200 freestyle, which is the event that Thomas and I raced in. We swam that morning, we both qualified top 8, we come back that evening, we race, and almost impossibly enough, we went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. So we tied. I I know, it's kind of impressive I can tie with a 6'4" man. But anyways, we tied. We go behind the awards podium where they'll hand you your trophy, you walk out, you're named an All-American, and we go behind there, and the official looks at both Thomas and myself and says, "Great job, but you guys tied. And we only have one trophy, so we're gonna give this trophy to Lia. Riley, sorry, but you go home empty-handed." And I was so taken aback. And so I said, "Okay, I know we tied. I know there's one trophy, but why are you adamant on giving this trophy to Lia?" And they didn't give him a script for this. And so he kind of stumbled on his words and, well, we're just doing this in chronological order. And so I said, "Okay, well, G comes before T. So what are you being chronological about?" And I actually appreciate his honesty, because he said, "Well, they've made it clear we have to give Lia the trophy for photo purposes. Lia has to have the trophy for pictures. You can pose with this trophy, but you have to give yours back. Lia takes the trophy home. You have to go home empty-handed, end of story." And so let me reiterate, I didn't even want the stupid trophy. It wasn't the tangible $5 production dinky trophy they were giving us that was upsetting me. It was the principle behind what they were doing. When they reduced everything, again, that we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op, to validate the feelings and the identity and the self-perception of a male at the expense of our own, that's when I realized I had had enough. And so we get on the podium, and I remember there's this photo, and I'm glaring at Thomas, again, who's towering over me. But in that moment, I can vividly remember thinking, because I was waiting for someone else to stick up for us. I was waiting for a coach, an official, a parent, some other swimmer, someone with political power, someone who was supposed to be protecting us to protect us. And in that moment, I just remember thinking, if we as female athletes, if we as women aren't willing to stick up for ourselves, we can't expect anyone else to stick up for us. This has to come from us. And so it was right then and there in my mind, I decided that I was done lying, because that's what they were asking us to do. When they were asking us to smile and step aside and allow this man onto our podium, taking our scholarships and our titles and our opportunities and our trophies away from us, that was asking us to lie. And I know I talked about the locker room, but if I had to see it, you guys at least have to hear about it. First of all, we weren't forewarned we would be sharing a changing space. No one told us. The only time we became aware we would be undressing next to a man was when we were undressing next to a man. But I'll set the scene. A swimming locker room is not a place of modesty. These suits you put on, they're skin tight. It takes about 15 minutes to really poke and prod and tuck yourself into these suits, 15 minutes of which you're fully exposed. But it's also a place of buzzing and chatter and laughter, because this is the one meet every year that every team around the country, if you qualified, every team gets to be at this meet. So you get to see your friends from all over the country who you only get to see this one meet. And so lots of talking, lots of laughter. I just remember I was changing from my suit, getting into my clothes. I had my back turned, and all of a sudden the locker room gets dead silent. I thought, that's weird. And so I turn around. Again, a 6'4" man taking his women's swimsuit off, fully intact with and exposing male parts. And I just remember I was so shocked. There was a lot of feelings in that time. Of course, it's belittlement, it's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, but really it felt like betrayal. And to not even over-exaggerate, I think the best word to describe this experience is traumatic. But not even just because of the locker room experience, but I say it's traumatic because how easy was it for them to throw our rights to privacy totally out of the window without even telling us? And so I immediately left the locker room and went up to one of the NCAA officials who was on the pool deck, and I said, "Look, I know the guidelines of the competition, which the guidelines of the competition were merely 12 months of HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, to which they didn't test levels. They didn't actually make sure you were on 12 months of hormone replacement therapy. They just trusted. So I said, I know the guidelines of the competition, but what are the guidelines to allow a man in our locker room? And so nonchalantly, this guy says, oh, well, we actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex. And so, one, by admitting you had to change the rules, you're admitting this is a man. And two, unisex? Any man could have walked into that locker room, any coach, any parent, any pervert who wanted to be in there would have had full reins to be in there, and bare minimum, we weren't even told this was the arrangement. And that's why I say it felt like betrayal. But there's one other piece about this meet that I think the media has done a terrible job of covering. While we had Lia Thomas, who is of course male to female at that meet, we had another trans swimmer who was a female transitioning to male. Formerly Izzy, now goes by the name of Isaac, had a double mastectomy, and we were told we had to use he, him pronouns for this individual and entirely treat this person as a man. Picture this, the 100 freestyle final, top 8 in the country. You have a woman swimming only in a Speedo, and a man with a bulge swimming in a women's swimsuit. It felt like the Twilight Zone. But I say this to show how it's the women's category that's at jeopardy here. Because if we were really basing this off gender identity, why did we have someone who fully identifies as a male competing with the women? And I can answer this. It's because Izzy, now Isaac, would have and will never have, I guess will never be able to compete at this same level against the men. And now Isaac is competing with the men and finishes dead last every single time. As an All-American, I think finished 5th or 6th in the country in the 100 freestyle as a woman. The one meet I watched of Isaac's this year, and I don't even say this to be funny, again, I'm sharing exactly what happened. The one meet I watched of Isaac's this year, the only male swimmer she beat was a male swimmer with one arm. Again, to show how it's the women's category that's at jeopardy here. After this meet, I think we can all agree swimming is not a sport that garners media attention. But this meet was special because there was a lot of media attention. Left-leaning, right-leaning outlets, everything in between, on the ground at that meet. My inbox was filled with reporters who were desperately hoping to get a quote, and my teammates, all of us on the pool deck. These reporters, they would find your name on the heat sheet, they would look up your profile. I'm pretty sure my parents were getting emails because they wanted a quote from someone, but no one would provide it. And so I remember after I tied with Thomas, I immediately called my athletic director. His name is Mitch Barnhart. We have a great relationship. He's a phenomenal guy. And I said, Mitch, you know, this is what happened. This is how we feel. How do you feel if I take a public stance in acknowledging how this is wrong? And he just responded back with, Riley, I love you. I support you. I will never forget, he said, speak your heart, stay true to your convictions, and never worry about painting this university in a bad light. And I thought nothing of it. I thought that was how any athletic director would talk to their student athlete. And I'll get to that in a minute and why that was a wrong assumption. So I ended up picking a reporter from the Daily Wire who was in my inbox, one of the many. And I called her, I told her the locker room, I told her about the trophy incident, and the story blew up. I think for a couple reasons, one of which, sports is something that resonates with everyone. It's not boring like the environment or the economy. Everybody loves sports. But two, I think people got to see the severity of what we were dealing with as women. And so this Daily Wire hit very quickly turned into Fox and CPAC and getting pulled on stage with President Trump. totally, to which I did not know that was going to happen. So a lot of really cool opportunities. I felt like I was shedding light on the story, but I pretty quickly began to feel like I was preaching to the choir, because every old man who watches Fox already agrees with me. How could I? My dad is one of those old men too, so I'm allowed to say that. But how could I reach the people who don't agree with me? Because they're the ones who need to hear this. And so I began reaching out to CNN. I began reaching out to MSNBC, a lot of local left-leaning outlets from my hometown in Nashville and in Lexington, Kentucky. And every single one either didn't respond or responded back with, "Sorry, we don't want to give you a platform to spread your hate." And so this shocked me. I was only providing them with the perspective of someone who saw this firsthand, someone who was on that pool deck, in that locker room, competing a lane over from a man. They were reporting on the story, they were actively covering it, yet they wouldn't consider my perspective. And this was, I knew media bias existed, but this was my first time really seeing how they want us to be divided. They don't want unity, make no mistake, they want the division that they're causing. And so I continued on, really saying yes to every opportunity, whatever that looked like. It could be a podcast with one listener, and I would say yes to it. I kind of began to feel like I was then complaining. I'd said the same thing over and over again, but no changes were being made. I felt like I was whining. And my dad, who's a former NFL player, he always told me growing up, it's either put up or shut up. You can complain all you want, but unless you're willing to do something about it, then it's merely just complaining. And so that's when I started getting involved in doing something about it. I began traveling state to state, testifying on behalf of any sort of fairness in women's sports bill that was being put forward, at first entirely out of my own pocket, traveling to these states. I can now say 22 states have passed some sort of fairness in women's sports bill, which is great news. Minnesota needs some help. But also at the state level, I've been working with lawmakers to create a new bill called the Women's Bill of Rights, which is a bill, I can't even believe I have to say this, it's a bill that defines the word woman. We got it passed in Kansas this year and my home state of Tennessee, which I think is pretty cool because Tennessee was the 36th state to implement voting rights for women, but now they're the second state to be able to acknowledge what a woman is. And I think that shows how the reverse, the dichotomy of how the left was once the party that embraced feminism and the feminist movement, but now this is entirely switched and it's Republicans who are seizing the opportunity to protect women's sex-based protections. So that is at the state level, but at the federal level, we of course have Title IX, which is a federal civil rights law that was implemented to prevent discrimination on the basis of sex. We have an administration in the White House right now who is actively working to rewrite Title IX to where it's no longer preventing discrimination on the basis of sex, it's preventing discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And so what this means in a nutshell, men can live in dorm rooms with women, men can join sororities, which is already happening. Men would have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces on campus. Men could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. Actually, under this new rewrite, it's actually sexual harassment if you misgender a trans-identified individual. So if I were to call Lia Thomas a he, which I do, I'm the one who's guilty and charged with sexual harassment, not Thomas, who's parading around our locker room exposing his male parts, but if I call a spade, then I'm guilty of sexual harassment. So that's the message that the Biden administration is sending to girls and women, which is abysmal to say the least. So doing what I can at the federal level to combat that, I've worked alongside Representative Greg Stubbe to introduce the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act on the House side, to which it passed. Worked with Senator Tuberville on the Senate side, to which it wasn't as fortunate to get through, but that's why it's crucial we need a new administration in the White House who will put America back on tracks. So a lot of work being done. My mission here is impact. That's why I've changed the direction of my life plans, is to make an impact. So I'm going to keep fighting for that as long as I need to. But I want to touch on the silencing, because I know I mentioned how my athletic director treated me, but oh my gosh, that is an anomaly. Lia Thomas's teammates, who I've talked to many of them at great lengths, they were forced every single week to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Lia Thomas. They were told that you can't take a stance because your school has already taken your stance for you. When 16 of the girls and their parents, they sent an email to their administration expressing their discomfort in the locker room. And their administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable, and I swear I have a screenshot of the email, it says, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here's some counseling resources that you should seek. They were told you will never get a job. You will never get into grad school. You will lose all of your friends. If you do speak out and any harm whatsoever comes towards your teammates' way, Lia's way, then you are solely responsible, and you're responsible for a potential death. And you don't want that, do you? Of course not. Who would want to be responsible for a potential death? But that's the emotional blackmail that they were using to scare these girls into silence, which effectively works, and understandably. And that is what was common around this country, not how my athletic director treated me. That's why I'm a lone voice, really. There have been very few collegiate female athletes who were on that pool deck speak out against this. And they feel the same way I do. The overwhelming majority of them do. I don't claim to speak for every single one of them, but I do claim to speak for the overwhelming majority of them. But that's why I've been a lone voice and a lone face fighting for this. I know people are sick of hearing from me and looking at me. But it's not just the athletes who were silenced. After this meet, I was nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year, which is the most prestigious honor for all collegiate female athletes. This is an award that not only encompasses your athletic achievement, which I finished my career very proudly as a 12-time All-American, a 5-time SEC champion. I'm actually the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, which means I still have these super manly shoulders. 5-time SEC champion, SEC record holder, 2-time Olympic trial qualifier. I had athletically achieved some pretty amazing things in my career, but also your academics. I was also the SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, finishing in the top percentile on the DAT, which is the dental admissions test to get into dental school, but also your community service. I was also named the SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. I'm very passionate about my service. I'm still the Special Olympics swim team coach in Tennessee. That's something I'm very passionate about. And so when I received this nomination, each university gets to choose one female to pick among all their sports teams. And so when I received this nomination from the University of Kentucky, I was so honored because we had the #1 WNBA draft pick, Ryan Howard. We have Abby Steiner in track and field, who's breaking world records. We had a national championship rifle team, a national championship volleyball team, but they chose me. And so I was so honored by this until NCAA Woman of the Year, full list of nominees came out, and it wasn't exclusive to just women, because Lia Thomas was University of Pennsylvania's nominee. What a slap in the face to all those women at University of Pennsylvania who had spent their entire lives working to get to that level, the D1 level, achieving amazing things, and they give it to someone who has, I guess, I claim spent 0% of their life as a woman, but 5% of their life as a woman. That's who they think makes the best woman. What a slap in the face. But anyways, the NCAA, they were having this, immediately the award was devalued and meaningless to me, but the NCAA was having this big conference where they were announcing who won. And so I decided I would go. It was in San Antonio, but I wasn't gonna go in support. And so this was the first time I was able to directly, hand to hand the NCAA a legal demand letter saying that if they don't stop discriminating on the basis of sex, there will be legal action. And still the furthest anyone has gotten to communicating this message with them. I've sent email after email, letter after letter, to which there's no response. But also at this conference, they had a big convention center where companies and organizations could buy booths and sell products, pass out pamphlets or whatever else. And so I figured, what better way to get in front of these athletic directors than to buy a booth at this convention center? And so I applied with my name, Riley Gaines, to buy a booth. I had been outspoken at this point, to which I was denied. And so I applied again. I'm like, I'm trying to give you $2,000. Surely you'll take it, right? Denied. Then I came up with an alias, which wasn't Riley Gaines, and they said, of course we'll take your $2,000. And so I got a booth inside this convention center. And I had little bracelets talking about Title IX pamphlets, and to every single athletic director who walked by, I shared my story. I got in front of them, I told them why it's crucial we protect women's sports, and every single one of them, every single one, thank you for doing what you're doing, keep fighting, this is great, we support you. In the first 6 years or so, I thought this is awesome. You know, we have the support, this is great. But then as it continued, I began to feel frustrated. If we're all on the same page, where's the discrepancy? Why are we catering to the minority if we all agree here? And so I began asking, you know, that's great you say you support this, but would you be willing to say so publicly? Oh, no. We can have lawsuits, you know, I'm the breadwinner for my family, I can't lose my job, I'm sorry. And then they would very quickly turn and walk away. And that happened time and time again. Even the president of the NCAA, who has now stepped down, his name is Mark Emmert, publicly, after the Lia Thomas debacle in the following days, after Lia won the national title, he released a statement, and I remember it word for word. He said, I unequivocally stand in my decision to allow Lia Thomas to swim with the women because it's based in evolving science, is what he says publicly. But privately, at the same conference, he has the audacity to come up to me and say, keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting. And the irony, because he's literally the one that we're fighting. But all of that to say, these people don't believe the rules they're implementing. They know that it's wrong. They know that it's unfair. They know it's a violation of our rights to privacy and safety and fairness in our sports. But they're willing to throw all of that out of the window, really because they're following the money. And it shows the lack of a backbone, the cowardice that these people in positions of power have. So that's what the silencing looks like there. It's not just the athletes who are silenced. A year after all of this, I've had the chance to really step back and I ask myself the question of why. You know, why is this happening? At the time when I was impacted by this, I thought, you know, I just saw it as the women in sports issue. But oh my gosh, it is so much bigger than that. It's happening in prisons. It's happening here in Minnesota in prisons, in Kansas, New Jersey, Ohio, of course in California. There are men who are realizing all you have to do to get into a woman's prison, which sounds great to a rapist, right? Is say, I am a woman. And they're doing that. And they're getting into women's prisons and they're impregnating women. But also, as I mentioned, sororities. There's a sorority at University of Wyoming, Kappa Kappa Gamma, and I know nothing about sorority, so I hope I said that right. I don't even know. But they've allowed a man into their sorority, living in their sorority house, bypassed all of the rules and regulations of what it takes to get into a sorority, the votes, rushing. This man didn't have to do any of that. He just was admitted into their sorority. And there's some litigation going on there, and I'm not sure some of the details they've shared with me that I can share because of the lawsuit. But this man is a pervert, to be honest. The comments he makes to them, one of the girls who had been outspoken publicly about him being in their sorority, she was driving on campus, and he was driving behind her, and he rear-ended her car, tried to scare her into silence by physically hurting her and rear-ending her car. And so now she's transferring universities because she doesn't feel safe to be there anymore. So it's a lot bigger than sports. And again, asking yourself the question of why, what's the bigger picture here? The silencing on top of the denying of objective truth, on top of the changing of the language that we use, in peer-reviewed medical published journals, it's no longer woman or mother. It's cervix haver, uterus owner, menstruator, bleeder, chest feeder, birthing person, the list goes on. I saw an article the other day, and instead of calling the female anatomy what it is, they called it a bonus hole. That is so sick. And these are in peer-reviewed medical published journals. So again, the changing of the language, the silencing, the denying of objective truth, the breakdown of family, the breakdown of our faith, the breakdown of our freedoms, such as freedom of speech. This is Marxism, textbook Marxism. And you can open any history book and see how that turns out for any civilization, and it's not pretty. Talk to people who have come over here from Russia or North Korea or China or Brazil or any of those places and have that conversation with them, and they will tell you these are the beginning steps, and it is a slippery slope, and our administration is leading us actively, step by step, leading us down the slippery slope, which is chilling. I mean, this is a lot bigger than fairness in women's sports, which is terrifying. And really, me, being a Christian, I see this as spiritual warfare entirely. It's no longer right versus wrong or good versus bad. This is moral versus evil. And I looked that evil in the eyes in San Francisco, and it is soulless. It is hateful. It is vengeful. It is violent. Yet they do it in the name of love and inclusion and acceptance and welcoming and tolerance and diversity of thought. But they didn't like my diverse thought. They're desperately looking for their identity somewhere. But the only place you will find satisfaction is finding your identity in Christ. A lie will never become truth. Wrong will never become right. Evil will never become moral just because it's accepted and embraced by a small portion of society. And that's the point we're at. I get told I'm brave all the time. I get called courageous. And while I agree, there is some courage to be had in doing this, seeing the backlash that I've seen. I don't feel brave. I don't feel courageous for saying what I'm saying that there are two sexes. Ooh, so brave. I don't feel brave, and so I'm stuck on this for a while. I was wondering, why do people keep calling me brave? Why can't everyone grasp this? And I finally realized we're really just scared of different things. What the people who are calling me brave are scared of is the cancel culture, is the labels. And trust me, you get called them all. Transphobic, homophobic, racist, white supremacist, domestic terrorist. They will throw anything your way. And again, while I agree, understandably, that is No one wants that for themselves. What's scarier to me than all of that is not standing firm in the truth. That is scarier, because if we can't stand firm in the truth, what do we have? I keep going back to this term, true love, and I feel like it's been placed on my heart. It is loving to say the truth. I have no hate in my heart for anyone, and I know this because when those protesters in San Francisco attacked me, I really just wanted to give them a hug. I'm like, are you okay? Like, let me pray for you. There's no hate in my heart for anyone. I have compassion in my heart for these people who are struggling with this delusion, and they need the care that they're not getting because their delusion is being affirmed through a lie. And that is the exact opposite of what loving is. Loving is to tell the truth. Those terms are synonymous. I could stand up here and list example after example after example after example of stories just like this, just like myself, all day long, hours off the top of my head. I really could, but I'll spare you guys. I think I've well exceeded my time limit, so I'm so sorry. But I appreciate you guys being here. Really, to see such a large crowd in a city like Minneapolis is really exciting for me. And this is what inspires me. You might think I'm here inspiring you, but it is this that inspires me to keep going. So I just wanted to thank you guys.
Riley, thank you so much. Now, we're going to bring up Jenna Stocker here for a few minutes of dialogue with Riley. Jenna Stocker is the editor and publisher of Thinking Minnesota, our quarterly magazine. She also is a former Division I swimmer at the University of Minnesota. And Jenna also has been outspoken on this issue of competition in women's sports. She has been on television several times talking about it, had a great piece in National Review on the subject. So we're going to have a few minutes of dialogue between Jenna and Riley, then we're going to open it up for a few questions from the audience. Jenna?
First of all, I just want to congratulate you on an outstanding collegiate career, a swimming career, and for coming and speaking with us here in the country and the world. Your story is amazing, so thank you for that. And as you've traveled the country, I'm not going to say how many decades ago it was, but when I was swimming, this would be completely unheard of. I grew up, and I was a distance swimmer, so I can understand the grueling training regimen from start. My parents are here, waking up at, before dark to drive us to practice twice a day. I'm sure there's parents here that have young daughters in sports that can probably sympathize. But I grew up in a house of modest means, and you mentioned the 7th and the 16th or the 17th place girls that maybe missed out on an opportunity to be on the podium. But I think that you can also relate to, for me, getting a scholarship on a team was really important for me to have a collegiate career at all. And if there's men swimming on a women's team, those opportunities might be taken away. And I think you probably heard from a lot of girls and maybe their parents. Maybe you can speak to maybe girls that say, what do I do? Do I just give up? Is this going to be a lost cause? Words of encouragement or something some advice that you can maybe impart on them.
Absolutely, and this is something I can definitely speak to because I get these messages all the time, whether it is from parents who call me crying because they're watching their daughter get obliterated in their sport, or the female athletes themselves who are discouraged. They feel like they're going into a meet, a race, a competition, a game, whatever it might be, with their hands tied behind their back. And I think the foundation of sport lies in a sense of fairness. Of course, the combat I receive all the time is, okay, well, what about Michael Phelps? He has longer limbs. Okay, yes, but the performance gap between man versus woman, let's take the world record holder in the 200 backstroke for women versus the 200 backstroke for men. It's 10 to 12%, which is a huge margin when you're playing a sport where every hundredth of a second matters. So that margin is huge, and that's unanimous across, especially sports with objective times like swimming or track and field. It's unanimous across the board. Whatever distance, it's 10 to 12%. And so these girls, as I mentioned, the foundation of sport lies in a sense of fairness. And so knowing they don't have that, they don't want to play. Why would you? And so these girls are discouraged, and they call me and they say, or they message me and they'll say, I don't want to play anymore. And so my advice would be, we can't compromise. We cannot stop playing our sports because that's letting them take the public square. We have to get that public square back. We can't stop playing. So my advice to athletes, young, old, whatever sport, is to be bold, be empowered, and know that the majority of people, even the overwhelming majority of Democrats, know that this whole issue surrounding sports is lunacy, is wrong. But know that it's liberating to say the truth, more importantly. When you know you don't have to adhere or be coerced to lie, it feels like a weight is off your shoulders. And my message to parents is to defend your daughters first and foremost. But secondly, this conversation very quickly gets centered around girls and women, and naturally, and we ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, which is a very valid question, because where are the feminists? But what about the question of where are the men? And so my other message to parents is to, one, defend your daughters, but two, teach your sons masculinity. We've deemed masculinity as toxic and bad and this undesirable trait for men, but that is not true. We need strong men to fulfill their biblical role of protecting and providing. There's this saying, and it's, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And it repeats itself, and it's incredibly interesting because you can see it play out throughout history. And I think the last time we had strong men was World War II. But we're in this part of the process now where weak men have created hard times, which we can only hope these hard times garner strong men. But we need to expedite this process. So again, teach your sons masculinity and defend your daughters.
And I know, from swimming in college too, it's definitely a different environment than high school once you get up to a certain level. And you spend so much time together in that locker room, in mornings and nights, and weight rooms and training rooms. And when you're not allowed to be free to speak with each other, girls can be girls too, we're young women. And so sometimes it's a little combative, but you throw into the mix something like, you're not allowed to speak your mind, or you're afraid to step on someone's toes, or you've been told by your athletic director or a coach or a trainer that you're not allowed to, that something's wrong with you if you see something wrong in the locker room. So what does that do to team cohesion and learning the lessons of sports that aren't necessarily competition, but how to interact socially and form bonds, and you make lifelong friendships when you're on the same team together. Some of my best friends, came out of that, and I just can't imagine not being able to have that security, that safe space, without.
Yeah, and you do. You feel like you're walking on eggshells. I was team captain at University of Kentucky, and I made it a point to have these conversations with my team. I made it from the beginning when we found out this was a man in November of 2021. I made it very clear to let my team know I thought it was wrong. And I made sure those conversations were facilitated, and I of course did it in a respectful way. I wasn't saying anything necessarily bad about Lia as a person. It was more the rules, of course, I had a problem with. But I wanted my team to know this was a place where you could have those conversations. But again, that did not happen across the country. Lia Thomas's teammates, one of which who I've become great friends with throughout this, she's actually the one who was on the What is a Woman documentary, who had her face blacked over. Her name is Paula. Her story, she was raped when she was in high school in a bathroom setting from a man she didn't know. And so when she got to college and she had to share this locker room with a man, of course that is triggering for her, for anyone who would have been in that same situation. And so she immediately went to her coaches because she felt like she couldn't go to her team, her captains. And so she went to her male coach and said, you know, this is my past. This is why it's hard for me to share this changing space. Is there anything we can do? And he said, I'm sorry, you have to be kind and you have to be inclusive. No. Which is unfathomable. So she was forced to change in the single sex, or I guess the family changing room, because she didn't feel comfortable in the women's locker room because it was invaded by a man, and she didn't feel comfortable talking to her captains about it. And what she told me is privately, because she made it pretty apparent how she felt on her team too. And she said privately, all of those girls agreed with her, but in a public setting, they shamed her for feeling that way. And she said she was so baffled by this, because privately, of course, they said they totally agreed, but when they were in a group setting, they made her feel like she was the oppressor. So yeah, it's a tricky field to navigate, which is why before anything I say we stand in the truth, and that is that there are only two sexes. And what happened to, you know, believing the woman, that's so far gone.
The Me Too movement?
Yeah, the Me Too movement. That's so far gone, and now they're shaming these women for feeling uncomfortable in a locker room where there is male genitalia. And I want to mention, Lia Thomas was still sexually active with women when we were changing in the locker room with him. And now it's come out, based off of the Thomas posts and likes on social media, that he's just an AGP, which stands for autogynephiliac, which just means he's sexually aroused as dressing as a woman. And we were forced to participate in that fetish. So that's really what that looks like.
And a conversation that I've had, my husband was an athlete in college too, and you know, and I know your husband was on the men's swim team, and yeah, I have two older brothers, grew up with boys. It's something that I think inherently kids know that there's differences, especially when you reach a certain age, you know, puberty, 12, 13, 14. And I know you've been pretty active on social media calling out maybe professional women athletes, you know, I think Megan Rapinoe has, you know, been pretty vocal. Even our own Cheryl Reeves, the WNBA coach here in the cities, says, oh, we have to be inclusive. And my husband and I have talked about this, that any mediocre high school, college athlete could play in the WNBA and just knock everyone out of the water, and it wouldn't be a contest. So how have people responded to you that had these bigger platforms, these professional athletes, when you tried to explain that, or you know, maybe call them out, ask them to speak out against this?
Unsurprisingly, it's the exact same way as everything else. Privately, I've had so many well-known, renowned, elite athletes message me and say, keep going, thank you, this is great, I stand with you, all of those things, when in reality, publicly, they're silent. Which, for a while, I I had sympathy for this. I could understand because, they do have sponsorships and endorsements and all of those different things. But now, a year later, seeing more women get injured, seeing more women exploited in the locker room, seeing more women lose out on opportunities, I don't have that same empathy in my heart because silence is complicity. And that's how we've gotten here. We need more people to speak up. But that was my exact point, as you mentioned. In the Senate hearing last week, I had the Human Rights Campaign president next to me who claimed Serena Williams can beat men in tennis. Of course, if we're talking about Serena Williams beating Senator Joe Kennedy, who's asking us these questions in tennis, yes. But Serena and Venus Williams lost in a blowout to the 203rd ranked male tennis player, who was, which I didn't really have time, I try to keep my composure more when I'm in those settings, which is hard. This man was smoking between sets. He had just played 18 holes of golf before he played these girls, drank all day, and beat them 6-1 and then 6-2. That's not the same argument, and that's exactly how, as you mentioned, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of boys each year who beat the world record 100-meter track runner on the women's side. Even talking about Megan Rapinoe, which I just think is so funny. It's comical, really, because she fought for equal pay for women, and she fought for equal access and equal resources when compared to the men's national soccer team. And now she's undermining all of that by fighting for male inclusion in women's sports. But even the U.S. women's national soccer team lost terribly to a 15 and under high school boys soccer team, which shows you right there the differences.
Well, I think we'll open it up to Q&A. I think we have some microphones out, and we'll let Nick and Bill go around the room. If you just want to raise your hand, if you have a question, they'll find you.
I'll hold it for you. That way I control it.
Okay. People don't really talk about the difference between single sports and team sports. Seems like most of the people criticizing you, women athletes, are on team sports. So if you have a male on the opposing team and you're playing soccer, it's 9% or 10% of people on the opposing team are male. But when you're in a single sport like yourself, or a single tennis, it's 100%. People don't talk about that.
No, I absolutely agree. Which is why I think it's hard for a lot of lawmakers and sport governing bodies to create a solution. Because I think if it was as simple as you're not on a team sport like basketball or softball, which I don't necessarily think I entirely agree with creating a third category for various different logical, real reasons of why that wouldn't work. But if it was, individual type sports, you could do that and it would be a way to appease majority of people, I would think. But team sports, it creates a problem. And so you're exactly right. But also in team sports, more so than individual sports, you have to worry about the factor of injury. In sports like softball, volleyball, anywhere where you're hitting an object, running into each other, colliding, striking something at one another, you have to worry about injury. And there's a young girl by the name of Peyton McNabb from North Carolina who some of you might have seen. There's a video of her, a male on the opposing team who got a scholarship for a women's volleyball team, mind you, at the collegiate level, who will be playing next year. He jumps up, he spikes the ball, it hits her in the face. This happened in September of last year. So in July of 2023, she's still partially paralyzed on her right side. Her vision is impaired. That was her last volleyball game ever, and now she can't play collegiate sports like she had planned on. She has to have special accommodations for testing at school because she can't retain information in the same way that she could before the head injury. So yeah, those are factors you have to worry about. And just yesterday, in her home state of North Carolina, Governor Cooper vetoed the Women in Sports Act, which I am hopeful will be overridden with the supermajority of Republicans in both the House and Senate in North Carolina. But that happened in his home state. He has 3 daughters, yet he can go to sleep at night knowing that he vetoed protecting women and girls in sports. But yes, I do think the team element versus the individual element adds kind of a different perspective to the conversation.
Let's take one more question. We're running a little bit over. Over there?
Okay, in one sense, my question is tongue-in-cheek, but in another sense, it raises a very serious question about showing respect and dignity for women. How many born anatomical females take offense that their rights as females are under attack because in their heart of hearts, they feel that they want to be physically undressing and showering naked in the eyes of random born anatomical males inside of a men's locker room?
All of us, at least, really, it is hard to speak for every single person, and I'm not saying that I do, but in that locker room, the extreme discomfort was painful, really. I mean, like, it felt so stiff, the environment. It was an inherent need to cover yourself, which I think we can all agree that locker rooms are a vulnerable place in general, even without having men added to that mix. But growing up a swimmer, undressing in a locker room where you're essentially half naked all the time in those suits anyways, so you become kind of comfortable being vulnerable, shall we say. But adding a man into that mix and that small amount of comfortability we had entirely out of the window. And if you're asking for the women in this room, I think it would be very easy to say, raise your hand if you would feel uncomfortable with a man undressing in the locker room where you were undressing. Yeah. And again, that's more than just Republicans. This issue has become politicized in a way that it was inevitable to become political, because ultimately it is legislation that's going to curb it. But it's not a political issue. It's really not. Sports should never be political in the way that they've become. And so even the overwhelming majority of Democrats, as I've mentioned, polling has shown that they know this is wrong, they know this is unfair. I've even had a lot of people within the LGBTQ community tell me that they know this is wrong, especially lesbians. Who are, of course, women who are attracted to women. They don't want to be in a locker room where they're seeing male genitalia. That's something that's uncomfortable for them. I'm married. My husband didn't want me in a locker room with a man. And my dad, the old man who watches Fox, who is the NFL player that I was telling y'all about. A very big guy, right? I had to hold him back from coming down there and going into the locker room himself and handling it, to which I told him, I called him, because again, we didn't know we were sharing the locker room, and I called my dad after this happened, and I was like, Dad, I just had to undress next to a man. This meet was in Atlanta, and so my dad was there watching, and he said, Riley, I'm coming down there, and I'm gonna handle this myself. And I had to say, to which I could only respond with, Dad, we already have one man in the locker room, we don't need 2. And I don't want to have to see you behind bars, which that's how that would have ended up. So yeah, it's an uncomfortable situation. Outside of just that, you have to worry about religious freedom being infringed upon as well, because there are a lot of women within their religion, you're not allowed to be in a situation where you're next to an exposed male. So there's a lot of different elements to this that people aren't considering when we're accommodating trans rights, which when they say their rights are being infringed upon, I would love to know which rights, because they have every right to play sports. A lot of what you hear when talking about this on the state level, even here in Minnesota, they say this is a bill that bans trans athletes. No, it doesn't. Everyone should play sports. Every single person, regardless of race, sex, your gender identity, your sexual orientation. Everyone should be entitled to playing sports. There's so many benefits to playing sports. No one is being banned. You have the right to play. It's just about playing where is fair and where is safe, and I don't understand how that's overly controversial. Everyone should play where is fair and where is safe.
That is a great place to end our program. Let's have a nice round of applause. Then I've got a couple of very quick announcements. So, two quick things. Number one, we are a grassroots organization. We are supported by 10,000 Minnesotans exactly like you. That is what keeps us in business, and we would love to make it 10,001. And so, take a look at your table, and you will see that there are envelopes on the table where you can put some cash or you can put a check and you can drop it off at the table on your way out, and we would love to have your support. You can also go online anytime at americanexperiment.org and contribute to help support our work, and I really hope you will do that. We also have some materials on the table on the way out. Thinking Minnesota is our quarterly magazine. It's a terrific magazine. Jenna edits it. Not only is it terrific, it's also free. And so all you have to do is find the little card that is in every copy of the magazine, put in your name and your mailing address, drop it in a mailbox, and you will be added to our distribution list for Thinking Minnesota. If you also put in your email address, we will add you to our twice-a-week emails with a lot of great information, links to great stuff on our website. So please do what you can to support our work. And finally, Riley is going to stick around for 15 minutes or so, and if you'd like to get a picture, we're going to try to do a very, very quick line. I think we'll just do it right here. And so we won't have time to accommodate everybody, but if you want to get a picture with Riley, we'll do that at least for a while. So thank you all very much for coming.